Hi, I'm Ylli with the Special Competitive Studies Project. I've spent 12 years in government, and today is one of those days in which we thought we need an urgent memo to the president to talk about DeepSeek. In addition to the newsletter we're releasing today, our chair, Eric Schmidt, has a piece in Washington Post. Please take a look at it and enjoy the conversation I had with my colleagues, David, Channing, and Libby. Hi, I'm Ylli from the Special Competitive Studies Project. We are a tech-first national security group. I'm here with my colleague, David Lin. David, welcome. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're doing this ad hoc episode of the Memos to the President, primarily more with short videos. I think why we wanted to talk today, David, is really the release of DeepSeek and the implications. What does it mean in a broad, China tech competition with the United States? David, okay, put this a little bit in the context of, as somebody who has tracked U.S.-China tech competition for the last, many, many years, what does this mean?
No, I think it's really interesting to kind of zoom out and take a look at where we're at right now. At the end of the Biden administration, they passed an executive order with the export control framework for AI diffusion, which was very hardware centric, going as far as to attribute
dividing the world in multiple zones.
Tiers, right?
Tiers.
Yeah, and
Three
giving
tiers,
countries, partner, allied, or less trusted countries quotas of GPUs that the U.S. can export to them. That happened in December. Just last week, we saw Stargate be announced with OpenAI, SoftBank, Oracle, $500 billion worth of investment in AI infrastructure and data centers. Now we come to DeepSeek's R1 or V3, and it's now flipping the script on this hardware-centric approach to AI development.
Cost-centric model,
yeah.
Building
high cost, high capex, high infrastructure, high compute. And we're seeing that reflected in some of a lot of these concerns have been long simmering, and I think what we've seen reflected in the stock market is it really amplified some of these long-held assumptions that everyone was starting to question, but it started to push that over the edge, and just the irony or the coincidence of the scrappy small Chinese tech startup that, as far as I'm aware, isn't backed by any of the major Chinese internet companies.
Right.
It's very much its own VC
right.
owned company that, for all intents and purposes, came out of the blue and has kind of just blown everything out of the water. Is really astonishing to watch.
Can I ask you, because you talk in our newsletter about the moments when these things happen. Mm-hmm. I worked in the Pentagon when Secretary Gates landed in Beijing, and the military there released their J-20 fifth generation stealth fighter,
yep.
which looks like F-35.
Mm-hmm.
Last year we were here when Secretary Raimondo visited Beijing, and right on her visit they released Huawei's Mate 20 or 60, Mate 60 cell phone. Mm-hmm. I know there are debates and there are speculations about the moment when DeepSeek released this. Can you just elaborate about the timing of this?
Yeah.
Is it important? Is it not important? Do you read too much into this like everybody else, or this is just a pure coincidence that it happened last week during the president's inauguration?
Yeah,
in Washington?
who knows whether or not. I would find it maybe hard to imagine that the small, scrappy startup
had a strategic plan.
Right, had strategic plans. But regardless, the R1 paper came out on Inauguration Day.
Right.
And I think, regardless of the intent, it has turned into, in essence, a strategic surprise along the same lines of the J20 and the Mate 60 Pro. And regardless of the intent, it is now being interpreted as China is now on the stage, on the scene. My question going forward is really how Beijing will react to this. It's definitely a source of pride, I think, for Beijing. The small, scrappy startup having developed this model based on open source and really revolutionizing and giving China a new name for itself, and whether or not it can innovate whether or not you can break through barriers in spite of U.S. export controls. The whole geopolitical dimension of it is really, I think, something that China can probably be proud of. But I do wonder, from Beijing's perspective, whether or not it's maybe creating too much of a stir and putting too much of a spotlight on China at a delicate time where, yes, China wants to send signals to the incoming Trump administration that they're here to play.
Right.
But at the same time, they don't want to antagonize the Trump administration into, putting aggressive actions against that could limit its AI development.
No, that's a great point, David. And as we talked earlier, I think this moment was building up.
Yeah.
You had months and now almost years since the release of ChatGPT, where enormous investments were going towards the infrastructure. Models were really becoming expensive. You had then divide between the proprietary and open source. And not to mention, everything was happening in the context of the US-China tech competition. So I think there was a moment of anticipating this arrival, I think, of a model like this.
Yep.
And I think DeepSeek really entered that perfect storm and then caught everybody with this huge surprise of, basically challenging every notion of how these models have been built so far, at least the open source models, right?
And I think a lot of commentators rightfully have said it's good to have a key assumptions check in the trajectory of things every once in a while. And I think this is healthy for the ecosystem, healthy for the tech competition, for us to really re-examine some of these fundamentals that we've taken for granted or just assumed to be true.
Exactly.
And I think the ecosystem will grow from it.
Yeah. And competition is healthy.
Yep, competition is healthy.
This is not the end of the road for either the open source models or proprietary models. I think OpenAI.
Next week there may be another announcement that some company puts out that flips the script again.
Right.
So,
right. Let's talk about some of the items you raised in the newsletter. Number one is, what are the implications of R1 or the DeepSeek's R1 for how the models are trained?
Yeah, I think the core assumption that it starts to put into question is that for anyone to build a frontier large language model, you need immense amount of capital, you need immense amount of infrastructure and compute. If we are to take the R1 paper at face value, it is saying that you can do all of this at exponentially less cost and less infrastructure than the paradigm we've been operating under. And that is a game-changing approach to building these frontier LLMs.
Right. And then the other issue is what are the implications for the future of the AI infrastructure? Because as you know, for the last 2+ years, there's a race in terms of who secures the most energy, who builds the most data centers. We've had announcements about tech companies partnering with nuclear companies, with fusion companies to build that future infrastructure. So what do you think are the implications for all these investments that have been made or promised or are planned in terms of the AI infrastructure?
So many takes on this coming from every corner of industry right now. But I think for me, I think one key takeaway is for the US, and maybe this is good news for the US, is that more compute is still better.
Absolutely.
Still positions you for advantage. And so having the leading edge, having access to the leading edge graphics processing units is still an advantage, albeit maybe not as big of an advantage as we may have thought.
Right.
So.
The other debate happening in the context of the DeepSeek release is the future of open source versus closed models.
Right.
What's your opinion about that?
People will only pay for closed source if it's better. Right. And so this starts to, again, flip the business, commercial, consumer calculation for open versus closed source on its head again. Right. And I think the other key takeaway here is that open source, by virtue of being open source, can still offers advantages that closed sources can. So I think there's some interesting takeaways there too.
Right, right. And it also matters, so like adaptability, I think, and integration.
Yes.
Like, you will see going forward, I think, whether or not the proprietary models get more integrated into everything we do, whether they're apps or applications that we use, on day-to-day work, or, the open source really becomes the backbone of the future of the applications.
Yeah.
What does this whole DeepSeek release mean for the U.S.-China tech competition?
So I think AI leadership will be defined by more than just one model. I think
it's not that moment.
This is certainly a moment that makes us start to ask some hard questions.
Right.
So I think.
What does this mean for the U.S.-China tech competition?
Yes. I think it really goes to show that we've underestimated in some ways China's ability to innovate. It shows that I think the CEO of Perplexity said it at Davos, that necessity is the mother of invention.
Right.
And in China's case, I would argue this is not just about necessity, but this is about survival for China's tech industry. They're under immense pressure right now, domestically from economic headwinds, internationally from U.S. export controls and just geopolitical tensions. The tech industry is fighting for its survival, and it's pushing, tech companies like DeepSeek to really double down and break through new barriers.
Absolutely. Last question, David, is there's been a lot of talk about the effectiveness of export controls that we have put in place for the last 2+ years.
Yeah.
Jake Sullivan did that at our first summit, the Special Competitive Studies Project Summit, back in September of 2022, and then the administration updated the export controls in October of 2023, I think. And then right before the end of the Biden administration, there's another rule that was released by BIS, the Department of Commerce, called AI Diffusive Rule. So I know a lot of people are jumping into conclusion about the effectiveness of these export controls. What's your take on it?
My take is that it was never the intent of the export controls to be to stop China's AI development. I don't think we give China enough agency if we expected that to be the case. I think all along there's acknowledgement that export controls are a depreciating asset, and that we could have expected China to find workarounds. I mean, Chinese companies find workarounds to domestic regulations all the time. And so I think we can point to objective benchmarks that export controls have slowed China's AI development. So I don't think we should point to this as an example of export controls not working. I think this is just kind of the nature of the technology exactly. And the competition of finding workarounds and ways to circumvent.
Well put. Thank you, David.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
All right. Continuing my conversation on this urgent memo to the president with my colleague Libby. Libby, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
One topic that I would like to cover with you is the whole issue of DeepSeek and data.
Yeah, so I think one thing to keep in mind is that, for the Chinese government thinking strategically, data is a really strategic resource from them, right? We see that in their strategy documents, in their research, and that's, I think, something that was really a primary concern when we were talking about the national security concerns around TikTok, right? It's about the type of data that they might be able to collect about U.S. citizens. And when you think about an LLM, we already know that people share tons of personal data with LLMs, right? And part of that is because they're designed to be like a friend, right? You talk to them like a friend. You say, you might share something about a sensitive medical condition, something personal you're going through, or if you're working at a company, you may be putting in IP, right? Think about you typing in code and saying, help me debug this, right? Like that's your company's IP. And after DeepSeek came out and we saw the reaction to it, we went and actually looked at their privacy policy and their terms of use and saw that they have huge permissions to collect the data that you're putting into this model. Things like your keystroke patterns, the rhythm with which you type, the features you use and the actions you take. I think that that's how they define their data collection, which is incredibly broad, right? That's basically everything you do. And so all of that data is stored in China, which means, of course, that the Chinese government has access to that data. And I think that that is something that people really need to be aware of.
Yeah. So let's break it down now in a simple language. Whatever you do on your phone that is a Chinese platform, whether it's DeepSeek, TikTok, Shine, or Temu, what happens with your data, Libby?
So that data is stored in servers in China, right? It is sent to China, it is stored in China, and sort of legally speaking, the Chinese government can require those companies to provide access to that data.
If you would have to brief the president today, what would be your first advice that he should do as an action right away?
I think that right now we have a really unique opportunity to sort of get ahead of this, right? I think we were caught off guard with some other very popular Chinese apps that then later became entrenched as people have become used to using them. They use them every day habitually. And right now, people are sort of trying out DeepSeek, right? It's the newest AI model.
Right,
they want to see what it does.
Right. And it's for free, so.
Exactly. Yeah. And so we have the opportunity now to educate them about some of these risks around their data before they start getting really used to using it.
Channing, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. I'm Channing. I am on our foreign policy team, and I cover our Indo-Pacific work.
Excellent. Thank you. Part of the newsletter that we are releasing today covers also the U.S. and the Chinese competitiveness when it comes to mobile applications. You did a study a while ago on this topic. Can you talk a little bit about where is the technology competition when it comes to mobile applications?
Yes, no, that's exactly, I think, the right direction in terms of measuring this future competitiveness, right? Because now what we're seeing is individual users, people who don't track the US-China tech competition as closely as we do, kind of participating in all of this, right? I did a quick search just in the last week how much DeepSeek as an app has surged in app stores around the world. And literally within a week of its release, in 123 countries, you have DeepSeek taking that #1 spot in the Apple app stores around the world. This is incredible, I think, because it's only been around for a week. Now, ChatGPT, of course, which had been that top player, is now maybe 2, 3. What I find, of course, most interesting is that TikTok had been that #1
right, for a long
app
time, yeah.
on the App Store. And of course, we were always concerned about the national security. Now that TikTok has kind of departed the App Store, it's, again, another PRC-based app taking that #1 spot.
Right. And look, I saw the same chart you saw. My question was, are people downloading it because it's really intriguing right now, it's in the news, or are people using it, which are two different things, as you know?
Yeah, no, exactly right. I think it's a mix, right? Obviously, there's people who download it because, it's the hot new thing.
Right.
But then when you download it, you'll try it out.
Right.
So, of course, I think it's a little too early to tell for the average user who has been using all of these different US-based models.
Right.
Well, it'll take a while for us to see, what do people really prefer? But my conclusion, of course, is, regardless of whether or not the DeepSeek model will answer questions about political leaders, about political events. At the end of the day, people are using these tools to write their emails, to condense their writing, to read articles. Right. And frankly, they'll probably just choose the one that they deem the best, regardless of these, what we consider. Or
it's cost related too.
Exactly, or cost related, right? So these are dimensions that I think we in Washington don't always think about, because for us, the first question is, does DeepSeek answer questions about Tiananmen Square? Well, your average person is not going to ask that. They're just going to use the model for what it is.
Right. You did that study a while ago for us. And so in your thinking, how does that fit? How does this moment fit into that broader, tech competition? We call it the battle of platforms across the globe between the United States and China?
Yes, that study in particular, we looked at different, more traditional tech platforms. So e-commerce websites, mobile phones, and ride sharing, et cetera, not the cutting edge AI. Now there are, elements. You can actually compare, PRC-based versus US-based AI models. And so I'm really excited to see where this goes. Of course, we need to wait for the data to come out on exactly how many downloads, how often do people spend, or how much time do people spend on these models. But to me, this is really that next generation of competition. And we're here where we have the stats. And, for the longest time, the ChatGPTs, the Geminis, the, Clouds of the world didn't have that competitor. And, Ernie Bot was very much not as successful as they wanted it to be, right? And so now it really is a competition.
Excellent. Were you surprised by how popular all of a sudden DeepSeek became?
I think I was surprised at how popular among just everyday people it became, but I wasn't surprised that DeepSeek came out of the blue. And I think a lot of people are shocked. Whoa, we're behind.
Yeah, right.
We're behind. And the U.S. is behind. We're done.
Right,
We lost the tech competition. And to me, competition is a two-way street. Right? There's at least two sides, multiple sides.
And it's a dynamic.
It's
It's
dynamic.
not static.
It's not-
Today you can say like, oh, we have 5 models, they have 4, we won.
Exactly.
Tomorrow they'll have 6.
Exactly.
And we'll have
We're
5,
in
yeah.
the thick of it right now,
Exactly.
right? And so if the U.S. and our U.S. companies and allies and partners, our companies are moving on this, of course the other side is moving too.
Absolutely.
So to me, it was just about, about time that these Chinese companies are coming out with something. And I think, as David had mentioned to you, right, this just shows, we're in the competition. Our companies and their companies are going to be competing fiercely, and we just have to keep upping our game because it is competition. It's not just us already winning and we can relax now.
Thanks, Channing.
Thanks, Ylli.
Thank you so much for watching this episode, and stay tuned for more episodes of the Memos to the President.